Thanks for stopping by at the Life of a Career podcast. We're exploring the life of people and their careers. Even though we are in the digital age, access to careers and career advice from professionals is still very much gated by wealth, status, pedigree, and personal resources. At Mentor Access, we are bringing life to careers and jobs by proliferating access to professionals and mentors for those who may not have personal connections to different industries. Our mission is to open up access to professional stories that might one day inspire children, students, and other job seekers who might otherwise settle for a career path because they weren't privileged enough to know about other opportunities. In today's episode, we are speaking with Kevin Palmieri. He is the founder, CFO, and podcast co-host at Next Level University. Thanks again for joining us at the Life of a Career podcast hosted by Mentor Access. Now let's meet Kevin. Great. Thanks for joining us, Kevin, at the Life of a Career podcast. Before we begin, can you give us a quick introduction of who you are and what you do?
Yes. So thank you, number one, for having me. I appreciate it very much. I am Kevin Palmieri. I am the CFO, the founder, and the host of Next Level University. We have a global top 100 podcast, 1,200 episodes. We just crossed 700,000 downloads, and we do an episode every single day. So every single day, a mentor in your pocket is kind of how we've branded it. So our missions are very clearly aligned.
Perfect. Yeah, I can't wait to get to that part so we can direct people to your podcast and hear, the advice that you provide.
I appreciate it.
So is this what you always wanted to do as a kid? Did podcasts even exist when we were younger?
If they did, they were definitely on the fringe and I didn't know they existed. No, when I think very similar to many children. When I was younger, I wanted to be a police officer when I was very, very, very young. And I wanted to be a firefighter when I was very, very, very young. And that actually, we'll get to that point in the story, but I actually did stuff with that later. But I think the biggest thing for me when I was young is I wanted to play sports. I wanted to be a professional baseball player. That was really, I don't know if I understood what that would have actually taken, but I liked playing baseball. And I said, imagine if you could do that for a living, that would be pretty cool. So when I was younger, that was definitely something that I aspired to, but not intentionally. I wasn't planning that. I said it would be nice if I could.
Yeah. Were you playing really competitive baseball then?
I was, yeah. So my mom made me play and I didn't want to. I was kicking and screaming and crying, but I started when I was 9 and I made every all-star team forever. Like every single year I played, I made some all-star team. And then I got scouted for travel teams. And then in high school, I was pretty good. So I was getting a couple colleges that were interested in having me for baseball. So I was pretty good. Do I think I was good enough to make it to the majors? No. But it's one of those things where if I knew what I knew now about growth and about potential and about being intentional with everything you do, who knows what would have happened. So it's interesting to look back. Hopefully I can help people by looking back today.
Yeah. At what age were you starting to play baseball where you were kicking and screaming?
9. I liked soccer because I was good at soccer. I was better at soccer than I was at baseball. And my mom, for some reason, said, hey, you should play baseball. Like my uncle was a coach. So she said, you'll play for your uncle because that's the team that you're going to be on. Why not give it a shot? And I think I was 9. I was probably stubborn and I was probably afraid and I didn't know anybody. So I'm sure I was freaking out the whole time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then so after I guess 9, 9 is probably a little bit too early to really consider career paths. When you got to around like junior high school, did your perspective on careers changed?
Yeah. So when I was early in high school, I discovered mixed martial arts. Oh. And I remember happening across some UFC fights, and there was another fighting organization called Pride over, I don't know if it was in China or Japan. Yeah. And I remember thinking, that is something that I think I would like to do. And my grandfather was a boxer and my great-grandfather was a boxer. So I proceeded to go take jiu-jitsu lessons and I started training to fight in mixed martial arts. And in high school, so at the end of high school, I was already doing that and playing baseball, but I knew I wasn't going to go to college. So I kind of already in my mind said, all right, I'm not going to go to college. So this baseball thing is going to kind of just peter out. What am I going to do after high school? trying to figure out like, what's the next step going to be for me? And I think the interesting thing, Eric, is I never wanted to do what everybody else did. So in a way, and I know we're going to get to everything today, but in a way, I'm living a very weird life, but I've always wanted to live a pretty weird life. So the reason I say that is if you're out there and you're thinking, I don't want to do what everybody else is doing, that's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean that you're wrong, and it doesn't mean everybody else is right. Maybe it just means that you're meant to walk a different path. And that's why I throw that out there. So after I graduated high school, I worked at a gas station. All my friends went away to college. I stayed back and I was pumping gas at the local gas station. I would work 6 a.m. to 2. I would go home, which was like 5 minutes away, change into my gym clothes. I'd go lift for an hour, go home, eat a meal, and then I would drive a half hour to my martial arts gym. And that was my life for a couple of years. And it was really interesting.
Wow. How many years was that? That's a lot of dedication to become an MMA.
It was a lot, but this is the problem. It wasn't enough. I wasn't committed enough. I was very committed, but there's a line between being more committed than most and as committed as the few that actually make it. And I just wasn't that committed where I was willing to go every single day and not miss when I wasn't feeling it and go above and beyond. So it was probably 2 years where I was doing that pretty consistently. And then I ended up tearing my labrum in my shoulder. I dislocated my shoulder when I was wrestling and I had to get surgery. And that was the first kind of knock on the door of, hey, this mixed martial arts thing seems really cool, but it's, number one, extremely dangerous. Number two, if you don't have health insurance, you're going to be in trouble. So there was a lot of growing up that happened in that time for me where I realized, okay, is this a pipe dream or is this something I'm willing to commit to and chase regardless of the discomfort associated with it? And I ended up shortly thereafter saying, honestly, I don't think I want to do this mixed martial arts thing as much as I originally thought, which is heartbreaking, but I still love it to this day. I still do my own training in Muay Thai. I'll get back into training, but I do not think I'll ever actually compete, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's the really tough lifestyle and career. For a little while, I was doing MMA fight promotions.
Nice.
For amateur. So yeah, I understand the struggles there. You're not getting paid initially, and then you still have to pay for the training. It's a really challenging pipeline to succeed there.
I love it. I love watching it. I like training, but it's one of those things where if you're not 100% in, you should probably be 100% out because it's not something you want to just dabble in. It's a sport, and you're quite literally competing against people who they've traded in their entire lives for this. So if you haven't to some degree, you might be in the wrong sport.
Mm-hmm. And then following that, what was life after realizing, hey, I don't think I'm fully dedicated to MMA?
After that, I remember I wanted to be a personal trainer. And I went to my boss at the time at the gas station. So I was still working at the gas station. And I said, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. I thought this was the respectful thing to do. I want to give you a heads up that I'm looking for another job. So it might benefit you to start looking for somebody to fill my position. And he was like, all right, cool. Thanks for letting me know. We'll take care of it. And I was like, awesome. Did the right thing. I get a call the next day at like 5:45 in the morning when I'm supposed to go to work that I was fired. So they said, don't bother coming in. You're fired. And I was like, oh no, this has definitely gone the wrong way. I didn't expect this. Okay, cool. So I don't have a job now. So after that, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew that I needed to make money in order to pay bills. So at the time, I think I was looking on Craigslist and I saw an ad for a position at a hospital and it was called a project person. And under that, it said your responsibilities will be some minor maintenance tasks as well as floor maintenance. So that means you strip and wax the floors in the hospital. And I was like, that sounds pretty cool. All right, I'm going to give that a shot. So I went in for an interview and they said, the only positions we have left are third shift. And my mom has worked third shift for like 20 years. And they're like, but it's like $2 more an hour. And I was like, honestly, I got no other option, so let's do it. So after that, I worked third shift, 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, stripping and waxing floors, cleaning bathrooms, cleaning rooms when people would check out, just a bunch of different odds and ends at a hospital. And that was a very interesting experience, because in a hospital setting, and this is unfortunate, this isn't the way it should be, but I was looked down on by almost everybody there, right? It was this weird thing where, because you're a nurse or a doctor and I'm not, you kind of just get to tell me what to do, and you don't really have to respect me that much. And it was this weird dynamic. And I always remember thinking, Eric, that, and this is a weird thought, but if the world was coming to an end and you and I were in the parking lot, it wouldn't matter like what you are inside the hospital. We would just be two humans trying to figure it out. And that's always the way I thought about it. But that was a real challenge for me from a self-esteem standpoint. That was a real challenge, because I was afraid of what other people would think, right? Like, all of my friends at this point are soon to graduate college or already have. And here I am. I don't have any prospects of a career. I'm working at a hospital overnights. I don't really know what I want to do with my life. I'm sleeping during the day. I'm not hanging out with anybody. So I did that. I think I did that for like a year and a half.
Yeah. No, I really appreciate you sharing that psychological part, because I think a lot of people go through that as you work these jobs where some people might go, hey, this is like a dead end job.
Yeah.
It impacts them. How did you sort of climb out of that mindset then?
I don't know that I did. I don't know that I really did climb out of it. I think there was a part of me that it really hurt my self-esteem. And I think I didn't have any other options at the time. You know, I didn't have a quote unquote a formal education. I didn't have a trade school education. So I didn't know where to go. It wasn't necessarily like I had a path. But I think what I tried to do was I tried to just understand one of two ways to go. One, I'm doing this, so I might as well do it really well. Or two, I'm doing this, but I don't want to do it, so I'm not going to care at all. And I think I kind of went in between those two extremes. So I think that's how I dealt with it. I just said, for me, I don't think this is going to be forever, but what are the lessons I can learn from it? And I learned a lot. I mean, that was one of my first leadership roles. Like at times I was in charge of the crews at night, and that was cool. And it helped me understand like a sense of responsibility. So there was definitely a lot of positives from it, but I definitely had to understand, and this is an important thing, your career is not you, and you are not your career, or you are not your job. There's way more to you than what you do. There's way more to Eric than this podcast, or Kevin than this interview. And I think that was something that I had to understand and then kind of unpack.
So, and then from there, were you looking for jobs to try to get out of that situation?
Yeah.
And how quickly were you starting to do that process? Was it like half a year in, right away?
I think it was like a year in, because at the beginning, this is the interesting thing. At the beginning of any job, it's kind of cool because you're learning all the stuff and you're like, oh, I get to see behind the scenes of a hospital. This is wild. I get to go in these private areas. Awesome. Then it's like, okay, this 11 to 7 thing is quite literally burning me out. Like I can't sleep during the day. I don't know how to do that. This is weird. So I think it was probably like a year in, I started thinking, okay, where do I go from here? So then I started refocusing on becoming a personal trainer. That was my next thing. Was I'm in really good shape. I've been exercising since I was 16. I know a lot about fitness. I know a lot about diet. I know a lot about anatomy. Let me study, let me get a certification, and let me go get a job as a personal trainer. And that was my next endeavor was, okay, I'm going to get a job as a personal trainer. I love being in the gym. Imagine if you could get paid to be in the gym. Cool. I would love to do that. So then I started applying for personal trainer jobs after I got my certification.
Okay. And then how quickly was the process to get to that? Was it just a couple months to get your certification, or how did that go?
So it should have been a couple months. I was nervous so the way it works is when you say, I'm going to take the test on X date, right? You have X amount of months to complete the training before you take the test. And I think I was so nervous that I wasn't going to pass that I just kept putting it off. And like I'd sign up for an extension and pay a couple $100 or whatever it was, because I was just so afraid that I wasn't gonna pass. I mean, I didn't have a great track record from school. I wasn't a really good student. I don't like taking tests, so I was nervous about that. So that probably took 6 to 8 months, I would say, when in reality it probably should have taken 2 to 3. So probably twice as much at least.
Wow. Yeah, so it was mostly probably in your head. It's just
100%.
like this inadequacy that probably compounded from your school experience and then all the way into where you currently were, where nurses and doctors were sort of looking down on you. Yeah. And then you were able to overcome it. What happened after that? We were able to find a job.
Yeah, this is another interesting one. All of my jobs have been very interesting, Eric. There's been so many lessons from each of them. So I applied at a bunch of different places, and here I am. I don't have any experience as a personal trainer, but I'm in good shape. That helps. Cool. So I get an interview at this place, and it'll remain unnamed, but it's a very high-end personal training boutique service where there's only 4. It's not a normal gym, right? So in order to even come into this place, you have to be a member, and there's 4 separate rooms. And I have my own room where I train you in this room. It has all the equipment. It's awesome. Perfect. So I walk in. Number one, I'm late because I think I got a flat tire on the way to the interview. So I'm like, this isn't going to happen. There's no way they're going to hire me. I'm so sorry for being late. My apologies. This never happens. I know you probably hear that all the time, but I promise it never happens. So they bring me in, they interview me, and they ended up saying during the interview that the fact that you don't have any experience is actually a giant benefit because we won't have any bad habits to break. And I was like, interesting. Okay. Very unique perspective. So I end up getting offered this job, and I think I was making like $20 an hour, which was the most I had ever made by far, close to double at that point. And I had to sign a contract when I agreed to work there that I was going to stay for at least a year. And if I didn't stay for a year, I'd have to pay $1,000 because that is what it took to quote unquote train me up. Right. That's the perceived value of us training you. So I start that job again in the beginning. It's awesome. Love it. Huge fan. Training people. I'm getting to meet awesome people. I can kind of make my own schedule. But after my first review, I think I had my first review like 3 months in, and it went okay. It was an okay review, but they said, Kev, you need to focus more on sales. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, it's great that you're getting your clients results, but like you have to get them to re-sign up. And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And they're like, just dig at their pain point. Like, tell this lady if she's not, and again, it might not have been this cut and dry, but you have to figure out what pain she will feel if she doesn't get the result she wants. And I was like, all right, that sounds a little fishy, but all right, let me see what I can do. I didn't want to do the sales part. Not interested in it. Don't want to do it. We get another review 6 months in. They actually cut my pay because I was doing so bad with the sales aspect of it. When that happened, I was like, I am out of this. I am not going to do this. This is it for me. So I think I talked to my family and I talked to some of my friends, and I quit. I called and I said, hey, I'm not doing this anymore. Or I might've been there when I did it. I don't remember, but they said, just remember that you signed an agreement that you'd work here for a year. You're going to have to pay $1,000. And I said, cash or check? Like how you tell me how you want it and I'll get it to you. I'm good. I don't care about the money. This isn't for me. So I ended up quitting that job. I went down to Newport, Rhode Island for the weekend just to kind of like unwind with one of my friends. And I was jobless again. Here's Kevin again, jobless, no way to make money. And then what are we going to do? What are we going to do next?
Yeah. So then what did you do next?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my uncle that coached me in baseball, he was the logistics coordinator for a building material supply company. And they were looking for a forklift operator. Who doesn't want to operate a forklift? How cool does that sound? So I go in for an interview, I get the job. And this was I think this was 2 weeks after I lost that other job. So it was kind of like a 2-week vacation, right? I'm feeling pretty good. So I go in, I get the job. Awesome. In the beginning, it was awesome. It was great. Loved it. So after the first, probably 4 to 6 months, I think I was there for like a year and a half total. Again, I know there's a theme and there's a trend here, but after the first probably 3 months, I started to realize that, oh, okay, this is one of those jobs where you kind of have no control over your schedule. So I had to be in the yard at 6 a.m. Some days I wouldn't get home until 7 or 8 at night. And I remember thinking, no, this can't be it. This can't be it. I'm going to work 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. No, I can't do this. So I talked to my uncle and I said, hey, look, there's a bunch of trucks that are just sitting in the yard that don't require any special licenses. Wouldn't it be good to have one of those trucks out on the road? I know how to drive a stick. I'll drive that. So he went to the higher ups and they're like, yeah, cool. So I then became a truck driver where I would deliver building materials to job sites. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it because I'm by myself. I can listen to the radio. I can take lunch when I want, right? I'm out. I get to see different things. The only thing I didn't like was the schedule was still kind of the same, right? And sometimes it was even worse where we would do deliveries into Boston, Massachusetts, and you'd have to be there at like 3 a.m. to get a spot in line for a big job. So that kind of sucked, but I enjoyed the freedom. But it got to the point where I realized, look, this schedule, I'm somebody who is regimented. I need to know when I'm going to be home. I want to eat dinner with my partner. I want to go to the gym. I need to know what's happening. So I remember kind of having a conversation with them saying, I need to have more of a schedule. And I basically got laughed at. They're like, that we don't have that here. This is the way it works. Do you want to be here or not? And I said, well, yeah, for now I do. So I was talking to one of my buddies that worked there and we were talking about how I didn't want to do that anymore. And he was like, well, you should be a truck driver like me. And I said, I don't want to. He was a truck driver with a boom truck. So he had a special license. He made more money. He was making really good money. And I said, I don't want to do that because you work crazy hours too. I don't want to do that. I said, I've always wanted to be a firefighter. I think that would be awesome. I've always thought that would be awesome. What does that take? So I started researching what it would take to become a firefighter. And you had to go, so you have to start, or it helps to start as an on-call firefighter. It just happens that my town that I lived in, Uxbridge, Massachusetts, they were sending people to the on-call firefighter academy. Cool, I'm in. So I go to my company and I say, hey, can I get home early on these days because I have these classes? And they said, no, we can't guarantee that. So shortly thereafter, I quit that job. And they kind of laughed at me a little bit. Not my uncle, but some of the people that worked there. Because they were like, well, what are you going to do? You're just going to quit? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know. This has kind of become a routine for me. So I'm not super, super worried about it. But I ended up leaving that job as well. And then I was signed up for the on-call firefighter academy in my town. That was the next thing.
This is an amazing journey. I'm excited to see what's next. Yeah. So how did the training go?
The training was interesting. It was very interesting. So there was myself and 3 other gentlemen from my town. And there was 3 classes a week. So 2 of the classes were like a 30-minute ride to another fire station where everybody met. And then 1 class per week was practical. So we'd use the jaws of life. We do live fire trainings. It was really cool. It was a really cool experience. Early in the experience, early in that journey, when I was meeting the other members from the department that were going with me, they were going to the training, I met a guy and he said, hey, what do you do for work? And I was like, just kind of in between jobs right now, floating around. And he said, do you have any experience in renovation, like construction? And I said, no, but I'll learn. And he's like, all right, cool. We're flipping a house. Come work for us and I'll pay you $15 an hour and I'll pay you for 40 hours, even if you don't work 40. What do you think? And I was like, yeah, I'm in. I know I'm going to get off on time because you're in the fire academy with me. So I know this is going to be good. So I did that. So they were flipping a house. So I said, all right, what do I need to know? And they said, well, you're going to be doing a lot of painting. You'll be doing some simple stuff, nothing too crazy. So I YouTubed how to paint. Like, what do you do to paint? What are those, do I tape things off? Do I do the ceiling first? How do I do this? So I painted all of the interior of the house basically. And then I just did some other odds and ends stuff. So that got me through pretty much the entire fire academy. I think the academy was, I don't know if it was 3 months or 4 months, but it got me through the entire fire academy. And we get to the end of the fire academy. I pass all my written tests, and you have to do 2 practical exams. One practical exam is at a firehouse where they set up a bunch of different tests. And like one, you're throwing a ladder up, you're tying off a hose, you're donning and doffing your gear in a certain amount of time. And then the second one after you pass that is a live fire, where you just have to go into a burn room and put out a fire, and then you pass. I failed the first stage of testing, where you're allowed to mess up one of the things. And I ended up messing up 2. So I failed. And I left that day. Everybody else in my department passed. So I left that day as the lone person from the department who failed. And I had to wait 2 or 3 months to take the test again. And I remember driving. I had to drive to the station that we were doing it at myself. I was super nervous, losing my mind. But I ended up passing that. And then I went on to pass the other one. So I was a registered level 1, level 2 on-call firefighter. And I realized at that time that the odds of me getting a job as a firefighter were pretty low, because I don't have a background of, like, I don't know anybody in the services. I'm not a veteran. I didn't do any military stuff. I didn't do any police work. So they usually get first pick when it comes to the fire services. And again, they should, because I think they're probably more experienced and more deserving, honestly. And I realized that, all right, this probably isn't going to work. So like, now what do I do? And that was a really interesting time, because I had no prospects. I thought that was going to be my career. So I had no idea what I was going to do. So for a while, I was in between jobs. Like, I didn't have the construction job, and I had no prospect of anything else. And let me tell this too. I think this is an important story. What really broke me, and I'm using those words intentionally, when it comes to the fire department thing, so the second time I was on call, and being on call just means you have a pager on your hip while you're sleeping, while you're awake. If it goes off, you go to the fire station, you're on. I was sleeping, and my pager went off at like 2:00 in the morning. And I got up and I was like, oh my goodness, this is happening. Wow, this is wild. Drive down to the station, get my gear, hop on the engine. We drive to this house down the street, and there's a car on fire in their driveway. And we jump off the engine, and my captain says, Kevin, grab the 2.5 and attach it to the outlet. Let's go. And I remember, Eric, in that moment, I had no idea what that meant. I had no clue what to do. I was frozen. I had no idea what I was doing. I was so nervous. I was so out of my element. I felt like such an imposter. Didn't know what to do. It makes sense, because in the fire academy, during the classroom time, I never asked questions. Anytime I had a question, I never asked, because I was so afraid that people were going to make fun of me. I was so afraid to be judged. When we did these practical classes, I never asked questions. I never asked, hey, can I take a minute and attach the hose so I can like feel? There was opportunity for that. It wasn't because they didn't give me opportunity. It's because I never took it. I never attached a hose to the hydrant to see what that felt like. I was so afraid to get judged that I basically lived in scarcity for the entire program. And this is my lesson from that. You are going to get feedback in life. You either get it along the way or you get it all at once. I got it all at once at the end. And that broke my confidence in the fact that I could ever be a competent firefighter. So that was the thing that really broke me and said, I'm not willing, again, back to the mixed martial arts thing, I'm not willing to come back from this. I do not think this is for me. I don't think I could actually do this. So I remember I talked to my girlfriend at the time, and she's like, so you're in between jobs. You're not making any money right now. My aunt, and again, weird stories, my aunt is the head of an inner city camp where you go. It's kind of like a micro trade school. where you can go to this trade school for a couple weeks, you can learn a new trade, and they're partnered up with companies that can help you find jobs. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a shot. So I signed up for this class called weatherization. And as it was explained to me, weatherization is you going into homes and you make them more energy efficient, right? And we were right on the wave of people are really focusing on energy efficiency, and there's companies that literally do this, and the government's granting. And so it's a growing thing. All right, cool. So I go to this class. I take 2 weeks of a class. I enjoy it. I like working with my hands. Cool. It seems like it would be cool. So I end up, quote unquote, graduating that. And I meet with the director, and she says, Kev, we really like your personality. You seem like a really good human. We're going to connect you with this company. It's one of the highest paying companies we have here. We think you're a good fit. And I was like, all right, money, cool, like it. What do I need to know? And they said, so you're not working on homes with this company. You're actually working on schools and fire stations and state-owned buildings. And I was like, all right, cool. I don't know what that means. They said, well, it requires travel. And I said, I'm out. I don't want to do travel. I don't want to be on somebody else's schedule. And they said, well, this job pays anywhere from $40 to $60 an hour. And I said, well, okay, let me think about this for a second. And there was a part of me that thought this was too good to be true. So they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you your potential boss's number. You call them, you set up an interview. We'll let you take it from here. It's like, all right, cool. So I end up talking to my boss. He says, we're not ready to bring anybody on right now, but we'll let you know when we are. I was like, all right, cool. So I'm probably without a job for a month or two at that point. And I remember I was at the movies with one of my friends. Shouldn't have been, because I don't even know how I afforded to pay for the movie, because I had $0 at this point. And I was walking out, and my boss called me and said, hey, you want to come in for an interview? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I get dressed up to the degree that I have of clothing at that time. I think I had like khakis and a nice button up. I drive to the headquarters, and they had these trailers out back where we would keep all of our equipment. So I walk into the trailer thinking this is going to be like a formal interview. And my boss, potential boss, says, hey, grab that and bring that over here, will you? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we were just talking while I'm working, basically. And we get to the end of this mock interview, and he says, you have a really good personality. I think you're going to fit in really well with everybody here. Do you want this job? And I was like, yeah, I'm in. Let me know what to do. He said, well, we're waiting on a contract to come through. Probably be a couple of weeks. I'll give you a call. We're getting ready to leave that day. And he said, so our first job that you're going to be on is going to be in Delaware. And I live in Massachusetts at the time. So Delaware is like 8 to 10 hours away, depending on where it is in Delaware. He said, the only downside of this job is you're going to be making $10 less an hour than everybody else. And I was like, I knew it. I knew there was something here. And he said, so you'll be making $50 an hour. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, you'll be making $50 an hour. And I remember that day, Eric, I was like, oh my God, my life just changed. This is incredible. So I get a call from my boss a couple of weeks later. He says, hey, are you good to go? And I said, yep. He said, all right, meet me at the office at, Sunday at noon. And I was like, all right, here we go. So I drive to the office in Boston. I get in a vehicle with my boss, who I had met one time, with a suitcase. We drove 8 hours, 10 hours to Delaware. We moved into a house that the company had rented there was 6 or 7 other strangers I'd never met. And then I woke up the next day and went to a big school to do a job that I had never done before. And it was the weirdest thing ever of all time. I remember we went grocery shopping that week, and all I could afford was bread, deli meat, and chips, because I had $0 to my name. And it was one of the best things that ever happened, because I learned so much at that job, and it afforded a level of lifestyle that I didn't think I could get. And that really was a pivotal moment in my life when I got that job. So that was a big thing for me.
Yeah, that's a long journey to get to that point in time. And then you've made it. What is
quote unquote, yeah.
Right? You've made it. Like what happened after that? Was it the travel that started to become a problem again?
Yeah.
Once you started to get accustomed to things?
Yeah. So it was interesting because At that time, I had a relationship that was it was toxic. It was not a good relationship. Didn't know that because I'm in my early 20s, so I don't really understand what that means. But I ended up breaking up with my girlfriend at the time. I moved in with a family friend. So I grew up with a family. There was a brother and a sister, and I was really close with the family. Their mom and dad were like family to me. So I didn't have anywhere to live because my family had moved and I was never home. So I didn't want to rent an apartment. And I was just like, I didn't have time. It was just this weird timing thing. So I reached out to this family and I said, hey, I don't have anywhere to go. Like, can I stay with you guys? And they're like, yeah, you can stay with us. So I ended up moving in with a childhood friend, living with them, and proceeding to just spend weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks on the road. And it was one of those things for me, Eric, where I was making money, so I didn't really care. The longevity of this was completely different because I think the first year it wasn't super busy, but I still think I made like 50 grand. And that was the most I'd ever made. So I was like, this is going to be fine. The second year I think was pretty slow to the point, and this was really interesting perspective for me. I went on Craigslist and I was trying to find a job to supplement my income. So I drove an hour and a half to a demolition. And I remember it was one of the hardest days work I ever had. And I was making like $12 an hour. And I was like, I cannot do this. There's no way I can do this. I can't go all the way back. Like, I can't go all the way back. So I was getting ready to leave that day and I was talking to the boss and I said, hey man, I appreciate the opportunity very much, but I can't do this. Like, I'm making 5 times this at my other job. Like, I can't do this. And he's like, well, what if we bump you up a couple more dollars? I said, it's not that, man. Like, you couldn't compete because it's different. Like, I appreciate the opportunity, but I can't do this. So then I committed to whatever it takes to stay at this other company, I'm going to do. What happened was in the interim, I ended up finding another relationship, and my girlfriend and I had lived together. We just got a new place in New Hampshire. We were living together, and she ended up breaking up with me because I had just done a bodybuilding show and I was just a shell of myself. I was broken. My mental health was not good. My physical health was not good because of how hard I worked to win this bodybuilding show. And when she left me, I had to look in the mirror of who is Kevin and how do I feel about Kevin? Regardless of everything Kevin has, how do I feel about Kevin? And I didn't like the answer. I didn't like myself very much. How is anybody else going to love me? So I said to myself, this next year, I'm going to make the most money I've ever made. She left me in October. And I said, next year, I'm going to make so much money that nothing else matters. That's what I'm going to do to fix my problems. So that next year comes and I get a promotion to a foreman at my company, which means I'm starting the jobs, I'm running the jobs, I'm closing the jobs out. And if you fast forward to the end of that year, I was on the road for 10 months that year, every single week. And we were staying in garbage hotels. I mean, I'm driving 8 hours on Sunday and 8 hours on Friday because we're staying, however many hours away. I'm staying up for 24 hours routinely. I mean, that was like every week. I was up for at least a day. It wasn't that big of a deal. And I remember I got to the end of the year, I had my final pay stub and I made $100,000 at 26 with no college degree. And it's like, that is it. That is the mountain that I was looking for. And you can tell through the story, like, that's all I ever wanted. But I wasn't happy. Nothing changed. I still was insecure. I still had low self-worth. I didn't feel good enough. I didn't feel smart enough. It didn't change anything inside of me. So, and I realized that for most of my life, I had lived unconsciously, just kind of going from one thing to another thing to another thing. The opposite of unconscious is hyperconscious, acutely aware of everything. So I started to become more hyperconscious and ask myself deep questions, and I tried to build up my self-awareness. One of my friends had me on his podcast a month or so later, maybe 2 months later. And we got to the end of that interview and I said, imagine if you could do that for a living. And again, that's like a theme, right? Imagine if you could do that for a living. And one of my buddies said, you can. I mean, there's people out there that do that. So I went and bought the equipment and I had a podcast 2 or 3 weeks later. And quite literally, I fell out of love with my job as I was falling in love with podcasting. I Loved podcasting, loved it. So I start calling out of work. I start leaving the job sites early. I know the result that I just got is not the result I want for this next year. So I'm not willing to do what it takes to get it. So it got to the point where I would have to be in New Jersey, which is 6 hours from where I lived, on a Monday morning at 7 a.m. to start a job. I would sleep in my bed in Massachusetts from 9 p.m. until midnight on Sunday. So I'd sleep for 3 hours. I would get up and drive 6 hours straight to the job site. I'd work an 8-hour day, and then I would go to the gym after. Because I was just so, number one, I was numb to fatigue. It didn't matter. Like, whatever. I don't care. I don't need sleep. It doesn't matter. Energy drinks are great. I'll just run on those. And I was just so homesick. I was just sick of being on the road. I just missed normalcy. So I realized, okay, there's an end date here. I don't know when it is. I don't know how to get out of this job. Everything else was pretty easy to leave because there wasn't much keeping me there. I don't know how to get out of this job. I think leaving this is going to be a mistake. But it kept getting worse, and it was taking a toll on my mental health. So one morning I woke up in a hotel room in New Jersey, probably 5:15, my alarm clock goes off. I sit up, I slide to the edge of the bed, lacing up my work boots, just another day. But that morning it was different. It was like there was 10 televisions on in my head at the same time, and every single one was on a different station. And one is saying, Kev, you're stuck here forever. I know you want to leave, but you'll never make this kind of money again. If you do work up the courage to leave, what are your friends going to think? You make more money than all your friends. There's so much significance there. What is your family going to think? Your family is so proud of you. You're going to just quit this. They're going to think you're crazy. And the last one and the loudest one for me, Eric, was, do you really think you can be a successful podcaster? Like, you're going to leave this behind. You're going to go all in on a podcast. That's how this is going to go. And in that moment, I felt like if I was to take my life, I would take my problems with me. And that was the rock bottom basement. There's really nowhere else to go from there. And I didn't know what to do. I felt terrible. I felt trapped. I felt hopeless, helpless. So I ended up texting one of my buddies, who's now the CEO of our company. And I said, Alan, I'm really struggling, man. I don't know what's going on. I feel I should be happy. I'm successful. I'm having these thoughts. What do I do, man? And Alan's been into self-improvement his entire life. And he said, Kev, over the last couple of years, you have changed so much and you've grown so much, but your environments have stayed the same. I think it's time for you to change your environment. So I ended up leaving that job 3 or 4 months later, and him and I partnered up, and we went all in on this podcast business thing. And that was one of the hardest things, but also one of the most relieving things ever, because I remember when I left, it was like, when I left the job, it was like there was one giant weight that fell off my shoulders that was quickly replaced by another giant weight that I'd never felt before. So it was a very interesting time, but that was the real inception point of what we're actually doing today. I mean, I was already a podcaster and I already had a podcast, but I wasn't doing it like we started doing it after that.
Yeah. What was the podcast like before and after that transition? Was it more intentional, following the, hey, I'm going to make this a career? Was the subject even the same?
Yeah, the subject has always been the same. And I'm grateful for that. It's always been, in a way, and I think it says this on your website, everything starts with awareness. Like, yeah. That was always my thing, is when I become aware of something, I'm at least capable of influencing it. It's always been that. The podcast has always been that. But in the beginning, I wasn't regimented. It was, I got a buddy, Eric. I'm going to reach out to Eric, see if he wants to be interviewed. Cool. I don't have one for this week. No biggie. When Alan and I partnered up, it was like, we will never miss an episode ever. And that was our commitment. We never have. We've never missed an episode together. So we started treating it more like a business than a passion project. And that has definitely served us for sure. But it was night and day. Before, it was just a fun passion project hobby. After, it became my life, basically.
Okay. And then what is a day-to-day or a week-to-week life like as this podcaster and podcasting business that you do?
So back then, there wasn't a lot going on. I would literally, and again, I think everybody thinks they think they'd be a good entrepreneur until they start being an entrepreneur, and you realize it's a lot harder to control your schedule than you think. I always thought I wanted time freedom until I realized if there's nobody controlling my time, I got to do it. I would get up at 4:30. I would go to the I'd be at the so I'd get up at 4:30, I'd foam roll, and I'd have a book in my ear, and I'd journal. I'd do that for like an hour. Go to the gym, be at the gym by 6, be home from the gym at 7, shower, eat breakfast, nap. I would literally nap after the gym until like 11. Then I would work from 11:30 until like 4. And then I would hang out and play Call of Duty with my roommate. So there wasn't a lot happening in the early days, where now my day-to-day, so I'm up at 4:30. Again, the morning routine is really pretty much the same. I'm up at 4:30. I'm at the gym by 5 usually, home by 6:15, in the office by 7. And I'm doing back office work, emails, WhatsApp messages, that from 9 a.m. until 6 p.m., I'm pretty much on camera every day in some way, shape, or form, whether it's us doing our 7 episodes. I have another podcast about podcasting called Podcast Growth You. So that's 8 episodes a week. And then I usually guest on at least 10. So right now I'm doing 18 to 20 episodes a week. And that's really the majority of my time is spent on camera doing what I love. Now, as the CFO of our company, I'm in charge of tracking finances and creating projections and, making sure everything's getting paid and all that. So that's another part of my day. It's not a lot because we're not huge. We don't have a huge payroll and a huge team that we're paying yet, but it really is this, Eric. This, from day to day, my time is spent facing this camera, talking to other people, communicating with audiences, figuring out how to improve our podcast, studying the industry, studying marketing, studying communication, and coaching. That's really all I really do now is I speak, I coach, and I podcast. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think there's a lot of people who are looking to become a podcaster. For those who are trying to be a podcaster, what was the way that you figured out how to monetize like this podcast, right? Like, was it through listener like views? Was it through auxiliary services that you kind of provide? How did you figure that out? Because I think there's a lot of students out there now, knowing what Joe Rogan did, they're like, that's what I want to do. But, realistically, I think he did it for 20 some years and has, a lot of other things that sort of propelled him to meet the people that he can meet.
Yeah.
Like, what's a practical, approach to podcasting?
From my perspective, and at this point, I've worked with hundreds of podcasters and I've known a bunch too. And there's a big difference between what you see in the public and what's actually happening behind the scenes. So it gives me a very unique perspective of, just because you have millions of downloads does not mean you make millions of dollars. And that's an interesting, important thing for everybody to realize. What we did is we said, okay, what is our podcast about? Well, it's about self-improvement. Cool. I'm broke. I need to make money. I'm $35,000 in debt. How can I make money? I should coach the audience. That's what I should do. I should just add more value to the audience's life by talking more specifically to them about their biggest struggles. That's what we did. We started coaching, I don't know, maybe 2019, maybe late 2018. I don't really know. But I literally said, okay, I know the names of at least 5 people who listen to our show based on the fact of them reaching out or sharing our content, whatever it is. I'm literally going to reach out to them and I'm going to say, hey, Eric, I'm interested in doing some beta coaching. Never done it. I don't know what to expect. It's completely free. I'll do it for the next 2 months. Are you interested? And everybody said yes. Everybody's like, yeah, I'll give that a shot. So I went from having 0 clients to having 5 clients, all unpaid. I coached them all for a couple months. At the end of the couple months, I said, hey, I can't do this for free anymore because I'm actually now having people interested in coaching at least. What do you think of $50 a week? And everybody said yes. So I went from making $0 to $200 a week or $250 a week. And that was the very beginning. So the advice I always give people is stop trying to build your business, your podcast, your YouTube channel, whatever it is, on the anomalies. Like the Joe Rogans, most people will not win that way. That it requires such a large audience to create passive income from a podcast that it's not even worth you trying. The question is, how do I add more value to my audience that they'd actually pay for? And that's why it's like, yeah, you can create a crowdfunding thing like a Patreon, buy me a coffee. You can do all that stuff. But almost by doing that, you're alleviating the tension in not making money. It's that weird thing of, yeah, you can rely on donations, but you're never going to make a living doing that. It just doesn't work that way. So what I like to say is, how can you find a way to serve your audience at a deeper level and solve their problems more specifically and more valuably? Because you don't get paid based on the amount of listens. You get paid based on the amount of impact. And you can impact somebody at a deeper level behind the scenes, and they're most likely going to want to exchange funds for that. And that's what we've done. And I know a lot of people, their biggest fear or their biggest bottleneck around that is it's not scalable. Like, coaching's not scalable. Don't worry about scalability in the beginning. It's going to take you a long time before you're ever going to get to the point where it's not scalable. And if that problem happens quick, awesome, good, because then you can figure out, okay, we need to rebuild some systems here. But I would say it's either coaching, group coaching, courses, live events, retreats, because it requires less people. So say they're going to pay you $25 per 1,000 downloads. Okay. So last month we had 25,000 downloads. That's not that much money. That's just not that much money. What's that? Maybe 2,000. I don't know. It's not enough money to live off of. But if you work with one client, they might pay you $150 an hour. $150 for 1 hour of your time. If you get 5 clients, 15, 30, 45, 60, 75, that's a lot of money, right? That's you can make a good amount of money doing that. So I would say coaching. A lot of people want to take the path of least resistance to the path of greatest monetization. It doesn't work that way. That's just not the way it works for the vast majority of us.
Yeah, that's really great practical advice to when people are considering this profession, because I think sometimes they just want to talk about what they want to talk about. Actually, this might be a good question to ask. Like, you sort of happened upon the motivational stuff, right? I don't think you were considering this as a business while you were working, did you? Or was it was a personal interest, and then you realized, hey, there's actually products you could or services that you might be able to actually provide later on. Do you think that other people should reverse engineer that? Because yours was sort of almost like I don't want to say lucky, but like it got to the point where it just aligned with what you were interested in talking about. What if someone's just like, I want to do comedies or something like that? Like, is there a way to reverse engineer?
Yeah. I would say by studying business. I think this is the thing. It's this weird thing where there's a wave that everybody wants to jump on, but they don't understand that many of the people that are winning and riding the wave, it's because they understand things at a deeper level. Like, we're not quote unquote winning because we have a podcast. I mean, yes, we are, but it's because of all the knowledge we have below that. Right. So I would say you can definitely reverse engineer it. If you have a comedy podcast, a couple things you can do. You could literally do virtual events once a month. That's completely private for your community. You charge $5 a ticket. You get 100 people. You just made $500. You can give them early access or discounted ticket prices. You can have them sign up to like a paid kind of like a video vault where you have a bunch of your different comedy skits. There's a million ways to do it. It just depends on how creative can you be when it comes to the business. So it's just important to understand that based on what your genre or category is, the way you do it will be completely different. But you can monetize a podcast regardless of the content. It's just, I think it's the understanding that if I deliver more value, I can therefore impact at a greater level, and people will pay for that impact. And I think people forget that with a comedy podcast, the value is the comedy. What is the unique problem you're solving for a unique person in a unique way? I solve boredom by making, whatever, busy parents laugh in a relatable way when you have children. Boom, you're off to the races. You start making social media content. You have some sort of behind the scenes paywall, so yeah, it's tough because it's very specific to the person and the way they do it. But I would study business, because when you study business, you start to understand it's not just going to happen. I think that's where people think, oh, I'm going to have a podcast and it's going to have 1 million downloads per episode, and I'm going to have brands reach out to me and say, hey, we want to give you money. That will not happen for 99.9% of us. It will fall on the skills that we have in terms of business, influence, marketing, content, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's great advice to think about how to reverse engineer that. Would you recommend people to stay at their job or work somewhere else while they do this, or maybe just take your leap?
No, it would be unreasonably irresponsible of me to tell people to do what I did, because I mean, it's funny, but I didn't have anxiety before this. I mean, not to the level I did for a while. There was times where I was literally having like anxiety attacks frequently, because I was so overwhelmed and living in anxiety constantly. This is always my example and analogy for this. No matter where you are, if you're living on brown grass, and that means you don't like your job, you don't like your career, you're not happy with what you're doing. A lot of us think of something as green grass. I'll become a podcaster. The problem is you're not jumping to green grass, you're jumping to dead mud. That's where you're going. So you have to figure out, what is the mud that I'm willing to work through? For me, my mud was being broke, $35,000 in debt. And like, it got to the point, Eric, where I lived with my girlfriend and I couldn't buy her Christmas presents and I couldn't pay rent. I don't think most people want that mud. Maybe you do. I think a more aligned mud for most of us will be working at a job that we're not super passionate about while building a side hustle, because maybe that mud is more aligned than being broke, especially if you're later in life and you have kids and a car payment and a family, right? It might not be feasible for you to leave a 6-figure income and make $0 for 2 years. And it's probably not healthy for you. So I would advise you to do 2 things. 1, figure out what is the mud that you're willing to work through. 2, get very clear on what matters to you as a human being. You know, is it certainty? Is it variety? Is it movement and freedom, being able to do what you want when you want? And then at least make your decision with that awareness.
Yeah, that's an amazing analogy.
Thank you.
As an entrepreneur, I completely understand that, where it really is just jumping into mud. Yeah. You earlier said that you couldn't control your schedule as well. And we used to have a joke amongst a group of us that were pursuing entrepreneurial like ventures. We don't want to work 40 hours for someone else, but we end up working up like 80 to 100 hours for ourselves.
Yep. So, yeah, we have the same thing. It's like a meme that says, I used to work 9 to 5. Now I work 24/7. It's like, yeah, that's fairly accurate. It's fairly accurate. But, and the other thing too, is I think and this is a fine line, but I think the level of struggle that you're going to have is going to be appropriate for the size of the goals you have. So I don't want, if you want to be a podcaster, you can do it completely different than we do, right? Like the reason I do things the way I do is because of the size of the impact we're trying to have. I burn myself out for this, but I believe I should. That's why a lot of the advice I get is like, oh, you should really slow down. It's like, I shouldn't. I should be going faster. I need to do more than I'm doing. Not everybody does. So that's completely different. Like there's ways to make money from a podcast doing less than we do. Just in the long run, you won't make as much money. That's all. That's how it's set up.
Yeah. And with that, we've taken a lot of your time. Do you have any last imparting advice, whether it's life or career, maybe even podcasting?
Yeah.
That you'd like to impart?
I like to talk about the time perspective of, if you're most likely hearing of me for the first time. And I love that and I appreciate that. But I've been doing this for 6 years, right? And if you clicked on our show at any other point, you might think these guys are terrible, or they have no money, or they're not making any impact, whatever it is. This is the understanding that I wish I had at the beginning. From day to day, progress is nearly invisible. I went to the gym this morning and I went yesterday. I look the same. I still look exactly the same. But 5 years from today, it's impossible to miss the progress. That, if you can lock that into something and focus on that every day, it's the long game that makes the difference. the people that we look up to have probably been doing it for a long time. There's no such thing as overnight success. There is such thing as overnight awareness. Just because you're not aware of something does not mean somebody's not already somewhat successful. You just might not know it yet. So I want everybody to understand that it takes a long, long, long time. And for 99% of the time, you're on the journey, right? The result is the 0.1% eventually, but 99.9% of the time you're on the journey, and you got to make sure you at least enjoy the journey and you enjoy the mud that comes with it. Because if you don't, you're kind of setting yourself up for a life of misalignment. And last thing I would say, I used to agree with this, that if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. I don't agree with that anymore, because everything has mud. To your point, Eric, I love this, but I'm in the process right now of losing my voice. My throat will hurt later and I will be exhausted. I fall asleep so fast at night because I give it everything I have. It's a lot of pressure. There's a lot that comes with this. I do work. I love what I do, but I do work. I think that's an important understanding that I wish I had earlier also.
Yeah, no, that's amazing advice. So really appreciate that. Where could people find you if they have any, either questions or just to learn from the lessons? Because I know that your podcast, this is, you drop nuggets of information like this all the time. So.
I try. So yeah, our podcast is called Next Level University. We're on all the platforms. We're on YouTube. You can find us all over the place. An episode every single day in your pocket for free. That is our jam. And then if you have any questions about podcast, anything, whatever it may be, I'm happy to answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you, and maybe I can direct you to somebody who does. My handle on Instagram is @NeverQuitKid. And if you just search Kevin Palmieri on Facebook and LinkedIn, you will find me.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll make sure to add all that into the descriptions of wherever we post so that you don't have to memorize it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today at the Life of a Career podcast, Kevin. We really enjoyed having you.
Thank you. My pleasure, Eric. I appreciate you.
Hey, thanks for joining us at Mentor Access. If you like what you just watched, please click like and subscribe, and also hit that bell so that you get notified when we have new videos come out. Thank you for supporting our mission.